Hey everyone, welcome to Talking Tokens, a podcast focused on interviewing the best crypto founders, market players, and up-and-coming startups that are changing the industry every single Tuesday and Thursday. I'm Jacquelyn Melinek, your award-nominated host and former senior crypto reporter turned entrepreneur, and I'm excited to be here with you all. Now, let's get into it. Today's guest is Keone Hon. He is the co-founder and CEO of Monad Labs. Monad is a layer 1 smart contract platform that does about 10,000 transactions per second with 1 second finality, and it is focused on improving the Ethereum ecosystem through parallel execution. It recently raised $225 million in funding from firms like Paradigm, Electric Capital, Dragonfly, and others. There's a lot to talk about here, and I'm really excited to have Keone here in the studio today. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jackie.
Yeah, so you are an MIT grad, previously a quant at Jump. What made you want to go and start Monad?
Yeah, I think when our trading team was, back in the day at Jump, it was a team of about 10 people, so pretty small. And we always said to ourselves, we're a small team that's building technology from scratch. We think we're working on interesting problems, building performance systems, but that's not the only thing in the world. And we were always aware, or at least I was always aware, that there was a much bigger world out there. And the effort that we had to build a really performant trading system that could trade in a number of different markets was very, very fun and stimulating, but also in some ways very, very closed off, because we were literally pushing to a GitHub repo that 10 people had access to. So after a period where our team merged into the crypto team at Jump in 2021 and worked on Solana DeFi for a little bit, it just became really clear to me, as well as to James Hunsaker, who's my coworker since 2014, that there was a huge need for more performant blockchains, and specifically more performant EVM. So we ended up leaving Jump and starting Monad at the beginning of 2022.
Okay, and we'll get into Monad in a second, but what was the transition like from being a quant to running and creating a blockchain? Was there similarities there, or?
There's definitely a lot of differences. As a quant, the work was basically building trading signals that had some predictive power, measuring that predictive power, trying to refine it, and then using machine learning to make larger scale predictions that would be used in trading strategies, and making that really performant. So the performant part is the same. The actual usage of machine learning and all the really low level data science work is definitely different. But at the same time, I think that being an entrepreneur requires making decisions and having to live with, just make the best decision you can and then live with the consequences. And I think that maybe has some commonalities to trading, where you can't get too excited about your winners or too hung up on your losses. You just have to keep moving forward.
Be neutral through it
exactly.
all, right? On the front of L1s, there are a lot of layer 1s out there, as I'm sure you are aware. What made you want to launch another layer 1 blockchain, and how do you kind of see Monad differentiating itself in the competitive landscape?
Yeah, Monad really represents an intersection in the Venn diagram that you might imagine drawing, where one side of the Venn diagram is really performant blockchain systems, and the other circle in the Venn diagram is EVM compatible systems. So Monad is in the middle, being both performant and EVM compatible. And our team thinks that's really needed, because almost all developers are building for the EVM. About 96% of all capital on chain, all TVL, is in EVM applications. And so it's very much the dominant standard, but we need a much more performant EVM so that ultimately developers can build apps that scale to many more users.
Yeah. So another question I had for you is why focus on scaling the EVM? Is that because that's where the developers are, or are there other reasons?
Yeah, it's where the developers are. It's also where almost all of the applied cryptography research is being done. People don't really think about that aspect as much, but there's a ton of research that's being done that's all building systems that are compatible with EVM or more generally with Ethereum. So we think that there's this huge network effect that comes from being a part of the Ethereum and EVM ecosystem, and there's a lot of value that can be unlocked for developers and end users by reducing costs and raising performance substantially.
Okay. And then in the intro, I talked about parallel execution. I feel like that term has been tossed around a lot in the past 6 months, maybe 12 months. And there's a lot of L2s out there launching, saying their execution is better than the EVMs, etc. But Monad went the L1 route, as we just discussed, to leverage it with parallel execution, right? So can you kind of explain why that matters and why Monad's parallel execution design consists, or what does it consist of, and why you went that approach opposed to the other way?
Right. Parallel execution in Monad is one big part of the story in terms of making the system much more performant. Just to mention that really briefly, so in Monad, the transactions are still linearly ordered within a block. So everything still behaves very similarly to Ethereum. Okay. And applications that were built for Ethereum can be redeployed in Monad without any changes, which I think is really, really important, because any change, any difference in any opcode then requires re-auditing the code and more generally just reevaluating everything. So full compatibility is super important, and that's always been a core design principle within Monad. Parallel execution itself is the intuitive concept of doing a bunch of work in parallel, but then committing the results of that work in the original order of the transactions, keeping track of the inputs and outputs for each of those results, and always being sure that the inputs are safe, that the inputs have not mutated. So we, to elaborate on it a little bit more, it's an optimistic parallel execution algorithm, which just means that all these transactions are kind of run optimistically, assuming that they're starting from the same starting point. But again, with that second step that's committing the transactions in the original order and redoing work if it's needed.
Okay. How would you explain that in layman's terms for the non-technical audience?
Yeah, I think, or
what would you compare it to, I guess?
Right. So if you think about normal computers, they are very much running many threads in parallel because there are many tasks that are going on the computer all at the same time. Like you might have 100 different Chrome tabs open, and you have your Spotify playing, and you have your Discord open that's, a bunch of messages are scrolling by. So we all know that modern computers have many processors and even more threads running on those processors, all running simultaneously. With Ethereum and other EVM-compatible blockchains, execution is serial, meaning that each task is only started after the previous one is completed. Right. And so as you can imagine, that's really inefficient because although the hardware that the blockchain is running on has many processors and has the ability to multi-thread, that's not being taken advantage of at all. All the execution is just serial in most blockchains. Wow. So Monad is basically making much better use of the hardware and the hardware's capabilities by executing work in parallel.
So it's faster. Mm-hmm. Yes. Hence the 10,000 transactions per second and everything else that you just discussed with me. I feel like Monad is definitely in its early days. What are some objectives that you want to get done right now that you think are important or that you guys are working on the back end that might not be visible to the public?
Well, at the end of the day, it's not like everyone, I think, associates performance with Monad, but I also want to point out decentralization because at the end of the day, a blockchain is a decentralized network with nodes that are geographically decentralized all around the world, all maintaining shared global state. And that shared global state with decentralized control over that state is what actually enables us to have trustless execution of smart contracts. Mm-hmm. We don't have to trust JP Morgan to run the computers and execute everything and then just give us results. We don't have to trust one government. It's completely decentralized. And so Monad is actually a project about unifying decentralization with performance and giving both. Ethereum is, I think one of the reasons why Ethereum has been so successful is because the Ethereum community has been so true to the values of decentralization. People understand that it's super, super important for for example, for nodes in Ethereum to be very inexpensive to run. Like it has to be cheap. Anyone has to be able to run an Ethereum node. And in exactly the same way, the design of Monad is to make software improvements so that we can get the most out of the hardware, so that the hardware requirements are completely reasonable so that anyone can run a Monad node.
I'd argue that Ethereum's not known for being cheap, though, with gas fees, right?
That's true, yeah. For the end user, it's not cheap. For the person who wants to run a node, it is relatively cheap. And so that's a good point that Monad is actually giving both node operators and users a really inexpensive, like reasonably priced experience.
On both sides. Okay. What's the price for it? Like to run things with Monad?
So for example, a simple transaction like a Uniswap swap on Ethereum right now is somewhere between $5 and $50. On Monad, we expect that that'll be a fraction of a cent.
All right. There you go. Well, we'll check on that after the show. You also talked about decentralization, and I've heard you talk in the past about the blockchain trilemma, which is something that Vitalik brought up, the co-founder of Ethereum, that essentially a blockchain can't have all three things, which is scalability, security, and decentralization. And I think that's something that Monad wants to have all three. What are you doing to kind of get your chain there, and how do you think it differentiates from ones out there that haven't maybe hit all three corners?
Yeah, I think the way that I think of the trilemma is that it's describing three different axes on which we should evaluate the performance of a system. And, like whenever you have, multiple dimensions in which you're evaluating any like offering any system, ideally, like the best solution is just the best of all worlds. Like it's not always true that there are strict trade-offs. If you do the hard work to make the software really performance, we can get the most performance out of the hardware, so that we can get really high performance without having high hardware costs. So I think that, the trilemma blog post was definitely really good and really inspiring to a lot of people for a while, but I don't hear people talking about it as much, because I think when Vitalik described it, he never, and I'm interpreting him, so I don't really want to speak for him, but it's not that these are like, completely immovable trade-offs. It's that you should evaluate any system on all three of those different axes. And the job of anyone who's working on a new next generation system should be to improve on one of those axes without sacrificing on the others, for example.
I feel like a lot of projects, and maybe a number of chains though, don't really emphasize security until they're like caught in a bad situation, and then they're like, okay, we got to ramp this up, we got to put out bug bounties, etc. Do you think that the state of security is improving right now across the ecosystem? And kind of what role is Monad playing to make sure that you guys stay secure?
Yeah, I think that security is ultimately the biggest, like the most important priority for all of us in the space that are working on technical solutions to improve upon. For Monad, the main way in version 1 of mainnet is that we're improving on security is basically by making gas really, really cheap. We're changing the calculus for developers so that right now when they're writing a smart contract, they're trading off between gas efficiency and safety in some cases, because there might be additional checks, additional logical statements that they want to have, defensive assertions in the code that would defend against a bug, that would preserve an invariant. But sometimes they end up omitting those checks because that'll cost more gas. And so we're trying to change the calculus of this decision making it so that's really cheap to have all these additional checks, just by the inherent nature of the overall system is really, really cheap.
Okay, and then the third one was decentralization. I feel like we already talked about scalability, but on the note of decentralization, you are the CEO of Monad. Would that kind of mean you would no longer be the CEO, then you would transition to a different role if the road to decentralization ramps up and it really does become truly decentralized? Like, what does that kind of look like for you?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Monad Labs,
Okay, yes.
which is a software development company that is building just performant open source software that can be used to run a blockchain like Monad, the blockchain. I agree that it's really important to have a decentralized network with decentralized ownership of the network, and there's a lot of steps that will come in the years to come. But for me personally, I'm the CEO of a software development company that works really hard to build really performant software.
Contributing to Monad, right? So you guys can't just go in and like stop the brakes on this thing.
Correct.
How does that feel? Like something you've created exists without your control?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Are you tired of clunky onboarding processes killing your dApp's user growth? Let me introduce you to Passkeys Wallet, enabling one-click Web3 onboarding. Built by Exodus and backed by 9 years of wallet expertise, Passkeys integrates seamlessly into your platform with just a few lines of code and can reduce churn and empower new users to start transacting without leaving your platform. Exodus's developer-friendly toolkit empowers users to create and fund their own wallets directly within your platform. No more drop-off at critical moments, no more seed phrases, extensions, or complicated registration flows. Users simply log in with biometrics for a smooth, secure experience, helping builders retain users and boost engagement. Be among the first to experience the future of crypto. Access Passkeys at passkeys.foundation for more.
I think personally, I feel very heartened by the fact that the Monad community is incredibly strong and growing stronger every day. And, the community is identifying new leaders that can take on more and more important roles in the overall ecosystem. So I think that's the thing that, makes me feel good about it.
Yeah. And we'll definitely talk about the community as well. But in the intro, I mentioned the $225 million in funding. That's a lot of money. Were you, I have a few questions. First, were you guys aiming to raise that much, or was it oversubscribed? What was kind of like your goal there when you guys?
Yeah, the funding round was oversubscribed. I think at the end of the day, I didn't. We're just really lucky to have backers who really are excited about our team's vision, and I think it's helpful to hedge against risks, to hedge against changes in the market. I think it's just good to have a war chest. Yes. I can't say that was the exact number that's needed to develop this software, but I think
it'll last you guys for a while, I'd imagine.
For sure, yeah.
Well, what will it be used towards in the meantime while you start trickling out those millions of dollars?
Right. Yeah. It's just on growing the team, helping to, our team has grown quite a bit relative to the fundraise versus now, and will probably continue to grow.
Okay. What a part of the team do you want to grow, I guess?
It's really across the board. Honestly.
Okay. We'll check the job postings, right? You also brought up the strong community on crypto Twitter. I see it, the purple themed little like monster Pepe like memes. How did that come about?
It's all community driven, honestly. It's kind of interesting because when we first launched Monad's Twitter, and we're just thinking about early community growth, we spent a lot of time ideating and trying to come up with what is a good mascot, and we looked at all the other other blockchains mascots and drew. And now I have this Notion page that's just full of really bad ideas because
we got to see that. Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's really hard to come up with a good idea, but the thing that ultimately succeeded was just community driven. Literally every mascot that I think is popular in the Monad community was made by a community member. And then the community also kind of served as a curation mechanism for just allowing the really good ideas to float to the top.
How did you even build a community though? Like, what is the process for that? Like, that's a question I hear a lot from early startup founders and other people in the space that don't have that yet. Everyone wants it. So what does it take? How did you do it?
Well, we have a couple of sayings in in our community that I think are relevant here. One is no shortcuts. Another is that the ultimate goal is just to build something out of nothing, and those two things mesh well together, because for us as a team, we always knew that community is the most important aspect of crypto. At least that's my opinion, that the reason why crypto will take over the world is because of the strength of our communities. And it's really inspiring to see when it's happening, but it's hard, as you're saying, to know ahead of time like how to do that. If I had to elaborate, I guess I would say number one is just like working really hard to try to make the community a pleasant place to be in, and thinking of, there's this other mantra we had within our team: the community is the product. So in the early days, when we were still very far away from mainnet, I wanted the people on our team that were just focused on community building to not worry about the blockchain at all, to just think of the community as their product, that they have to try to make an amazing product. And so then you start to ask questions like, well, if I were a consumer of this product, like what would I want? What would the value prop be for me? What would I get out of this? And to this day, we still, and it sounds obvious, and it is obvious, but like our job as community members or community leaders is to actually deliver value to our community members. And I think ultimately what we've ended up finding out is that the value comes from a couple different things. One is new opportunities. So community members that are really involved are honing their skills, whether that's art or leadership or community curation or ability to organize events. It's like basically giving people an opportunity to take on more of a leadership role, and then that ultimately ends up standing out, gets recognized, and then we've actually had a number of community members that have gotten full-time jobs in Web3 because of the fact that they stood out within the community. So I think that's one specific area where we can add value, but more generally, it's just an enjoyable environment for people. And I think, crypto is also, it's very immersive. Like you can literally spend 24 hours a day on crypto Twitter.
You can, yeah.
It's really fun, but it can also be, when you're starting out, like a little bit lonely. So I think a lot of people actually want to just be part of something bigger. And so a community should be about giving those new people that are new to crypto but very passionate, or maybe they've been lurking for a long time, so they're not new to crypto but they like don't have a big following, and just like make them feel at home and give them over time like more and more friends to go the journey together with.
I like that because it gives them a place to, like you said, feel at home and be a part of something. And a lot of times when you do enter a space, it could be lonely or you feel like I don't even know where to go, right? How would you describe your community then?
It's pretty diverse, honestly. I think that the overall tone is pretty informal and humorous. There's just a lot of times when there's just funny things that happen in the Discord. There's a lot of lore. There's a lot of memes. It's just like it's a group of friends. The thing that can be challenging is that now that Monad is a really big project, so now a lot of people want to join the community, and as a team, we're always faced with the challenge of like how to continue to make the community like a welcoming and enjoyable place that is now catering to many more people. So it's probably the same thing as like there's like a pastor that starts a small church, and initially it's like everyone knows each other, but then like it starts to get really big because a lot of people want to join because it's successful. And then, can you actually deliver that same experience at scale?
I feel like sometimes for me, when I'm a part of communities, they start out small, you have your friends, you have the culture of it, and over time it grows and it becomes bigger. And you're like, wait, I haven't met that person. I didn't even know about this project. There's been like L1 based teams, and the founders of those L1s that are now like prolific and massive, they don't even know everything that's going on in the chain. And that's a good problem to have, but it's still something that is the reality that you really can't control kind of like the snowball effect that grows in these ecosystems. And that's a great problem to have for sure. But how do you kind of think about that and handle it when it comes to your ecosystem and community for Monad?
Yeah, I think that's an awesome problem to have, and definitely would speak to the success of the effort to just see this permissionless network flourish. I think in the context of communities, it's probably the same thing where the community gets a lot bigger, but it is, the core members, the early members they just like have made friends with a lot of other people in those early days. And then as they, become leaders in this community and, like have more of a following on Twitter or more, seen as more of an authority figure within like their like local circles, they're still going to be friends with the people that they met like a year ago or 2 years ago in the Discord back then. So I think it's really just a story about, as the ecosystem grows, it creates a lot of new opportunities for folks if they want to take on more leadership roles, to start new projects. We have a number of projects and NFT projects in the ecosystem that have actually just spun out of individual artists that were just creating amazing art. And then that, we've encouraged people to include their watermark in their art, but just so that they start to build their brand and build their reputation. And we've seen tremendous growth for a lot of artists, which I think is another great story that anyway, the point is just like, because it's still very early, there's a ton of growth that's happening, and I don't think there's anything wrong with the fact that, as more people want to join the community, there's a little bit of dilution in terms of like the exact chat, because there's just more and more people, like literally more messages. But the friendships are still going to be there, and people maybe just like migrate off onto different platforms or smaller group chats and so on.
That's so wholesome. The friendship's still going to be there. I love that. You brought up art, but what other types of developers or dApps do you kind of want building on Monad? Are you encouraging certain sectors to kind of proliferate on Monad, or is it kind of going to be a generalist chain and you're going to let the community figure it out themselves? This podcast is sponsored by Galaxy, and if you're immersed in the world of Web3, Galaxy is a name you need to know. As a decentralized super app with an impressive 21 million users boasting over 100 million monthly transactions, Galaxy is elevating its impact with Gravity, the magnet chain for Web3. Gravity is designed for full chain abstraction, zero knowledge proof-based privacy, and rapid transaction speeds, all coming together to offer an unparalleled user experience. Gravity opens the door for developers to effortlessly build on the largest on-chain distribution platform, and for users, it promises an even smoother, more secure journey through Web3. It's not about being on-chain, it's about being on the right chain every single time. Galaxy is on a mission to onboard the world to Web3, and Gravity is the magnetic force that will propel that vision forward. Ready to launch your Web3 journey? Build the future on Gravity. Visit gravity.xyz for more information.
Correct. Monad is a generalist environment. Any application that was built for the EVM, for Ethereum, could just be redeployed without any changes. I guess personally, I'm excited about at least two different verticals. The first one would be high fidelity DeFi, where ultimately end users can just get better prices and more efficient execution of anything that they're doing with respect to personal finance. Coming from the fact that it's really cheap for market makers to update quotes and maintain a very tight spread on an order book, for example. That's one area. And then the other thing is just generally consumer-facing applications that, because at the end of the day, if you're building an app, if you're building an iPhone app and you want it to be number one on the iOS App Store, that means that you're getting hundreds of thousands or millions of daily active users. And it doesn't, literally just doing the math, like if you had 1 million daily active users, 10 transactions per user per day, that's 10 million transactions per day, which translates to 100 TPS, which is like saturating that's more than the throughput of any L2 right now. So ultimately, Monad with 10,000 TPS, that translates to 1 billion transactions per day. That kind of scale is actually what's needed in order to support any application that is consumer facing that achieves, kind of crosses the chasm and achieves mainstream adoption.
What do you think the timeline is for something like that? Or is it just there's got to be a breakout app? We don't know. It'll just pop up.
That's right. Yeah, I think it is really just about, it's hard to predict, but in the same way that any killer app in the Web 2 space comes along, it's like when you diagnose how did TikTok come to be? How did,
I feel like it just came up during COVID. It just popped up and everyone had to download it. But yes, I understand what you're saying is like, it's just a random aha moment, maybe for the mainstream audiences too. Is that kind of what you want Monad to be, like mainstream? Or do you want it to appeal to mainstream audiences, or do you see it more as like very crypto-centric?
I think the early days have to be very crypto-centric. That's the amazing benefit of building in the crypto space, is that there are so many people who are incredibly passionate about the growth of the crypto space and will try out new apps and spend hours a day on crypto Twitter. Like, attention is an incredibly valuable resource, and if building any app in the traditional tech space, you put out an announcement and like 2 people like that tweet, and it's like your mom and your dog. Whereas in the crypto space, like, people are so excited about new technology and new apps as they come to market. So yeah, for sure in the early days, the focus has to be on the crypto native audience. And then that community is basically the the vector by which that achieves broader mainstream adoption.
Be the ones who go out there and explain it to the normies who don't know anything about any of this. Well, hopefully they know something, right?
There's a lot of people that are trading crypto on centralized exchanges, but have never used the blockchain.
Yeah.
They've never like withdrawn out of Coinbase onto into a MetaMask wallet.
Yeah, that's very true. Because some people ask me like, how do I buy this meme coin? It's not on Coinbase. And I'm like, how'd you hear about that meme coin? You know what I mean? Something else I wanted to ask you earlier on is, when you were getting Monad off the ground, what were some of the challenges or pain points that you guys faced? Because it's easy to, talk about like success stories and how things are going now. You raised a lot, you got a good community, people are building, they're engaged. But what was the road to this like?
Yeah, I think the single hardest thing for any startup is growing the team. It's getting amazing people to join at an early stage when you're a nobody, you have nothing, you have no social presence.
Bet on you, for sure.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And it's early stage hiring is really, really tough because you also don't know what you're doing with respect to what traits really matter. So I think it was a mix of a lot of effort and then also getting quite lucky with a number of the early members of our team.
I saw a tweet earlier this week, I think it was from one of the co-founders of Tensor, and it was like, when a startup is doing well, I might be butchering it, but it was like, when a startup's doing well, they attribute hard work. And then it's like, when a startup's doing well, they attribute hard work and luck. And then it was like, they attribute luck. And then you kind of realize you're just getting lucky because you were working hard, and I feel like that kind of can go back to a testament, especially when you're hiring. Like, if people see you working hard, they know that you believe in it, you're really in it, and maybe they'll get on board with it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think everything in life is based on a lot of luck, but if you're, kicking more soccer balls to the goal, you're going to end up with more balls in the net.
Yep, for sure. On the flip side of that, I want to know, what were some of the biggest wins to date for you guys as you were building this out? What are some things that when you look back, you're like, that was one of like the North Star moments where I knew?
Yeah, I think on the note of being lucky, I think the Monad community was just really lucky to have, members of the community join who were incredibly creative and just like really funny and weird. And yeah, in those early formative days, that had a huge effect on setting the tone for the rest of the community. And our team did what we could to, like showcase like when someone makes an incredibly creative piece of art or something, to like acknowledge it and kind of like help use that to set the standard for the community. But yeah, we're just really, really lucky to have, even like some people who joined the Discord on day one who, just been like really guiding pillars. So I think that it's probably similar to like Ethereum community, where there's just some Ethereum OGs who've been there since day one and help enforce the values of the Ethereum community, help be kind of the white blood cells that make sure that people continue to care about decentralization and the other values. In our case, it's like that, like the values plus also the humor, and the fun.
Yeah, it's important to have fun.
Yeah, so I think that on the note of wins, I think it's just, and it sounds kind of like abstract, but yeah, I just have a huge amount of gratitude to so many community members that really made, like the Monad community is not really made by the Monad team. It is made by those individual community members.
Nice. I like that. When it comes to scaling Monad, maybe this is the question for the community, but what are some roadmap objectives that the lab side of things have to keep things, fresh, relevant, moving forward in the next coming months and years, so on?
Yeah, the focus right now is on launching the mainnet. Where, we have the whole team working really hard to do load testing and various integration work with third-party integrations like indexers or block explorers, many things like that. There's a lot of load testing because it's really important to not have an outage. I think that unfortunately the Solana outages had a big effect for a while on people's ability to trust financial services built on top of Solana. So we're very aware that that's extremely, extremely important. We're doing a ton of load testing to defend against that. And then there's a lot of work around, having really robust testing procedures and release procedures, all the boring stuff.
No,
Sorry.
It's not boring.
But I think the other thing is our team's goal is to embrace and extend the EVM. So for this, first release at mainnet, the goal is just pure backward compatibility, high performance without a lot of other changes. But then we have a lot of other efforts in the pipeline to introduce new precompiles, support for new opcodes, basically extending the capability of the EVM, making the EVM more powerful, while still being always backward compatible, but helping to push the standards forward.
When is the mainnet launch? Aiming for?
As soon as possible. Yeah.
We get a time frame.
Our team is just working as hard as we can. But
okay. Well, once it's up, we gotta have you come back on.
Would love to do that. Yeah.
My last two questions for you is, first one, what else are you watching in the crypto ecosystem right now outside of Monad?
I'm really excited about Farcaster Frames. And I guess Solana had an announcement recently for something kind of similar. So just the idea of finding ways to integrate apps more seamlessly into the user experience is extremely important. I think that's one thing that's really blocking adoption is unfamiliarity with like having to use like a browser wallet. Mobile support could be a lot better. So number one, like Farcaster Frames are things that embed many apps within a broader environment. And then number two, the PWA, I think it's programmable web app. Sorry, that's probably wrong. But yeah, the thing that Privy and some other providers do, which allows for a website to actually manifest as an app within iOS.
Yeah, it's like integration of
the technology in a way that's like, it's just like an input opposed to like having to do everything by yourself on the back end, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And my last question for you is, can you leave us with a piece of advice?
Yes, my advice is that strategy is top down. So when you're coming up with a strategy, you want to like try to map out like, you know, we're trying to plan this initiative, like these are the this is the goal, and then these are some things need to happen. But then the actual execution always ends up being bottom up. And I think, sorry, that's a very abstract.
Now I'm thinking about it. It's like a triangle.
The reason why I mention it though is that a lot of people ask about, you know, community building, and they see the strength of the Chainlink community or the Solana community or the Monad community or whatever it is, and they know that they want that, but the actual way to build that is just from bottoms up effort. It's, you know, you can have a high level plan of like, you know, these are like some things that our team hopes will manifest, but then in order to actually make it happen, it's just a lot of grinding. It's a lot of constantly being present in the community, and just like, you know, step by step, consistent effort and consistent progress.
No easy way.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jacquelyn.